It was just a series of moments, a series of points of contact, of consciousness. And somehow in that moment, I just was like, oh my God, what just happened? And that was my moment. That was when there was this realization that whoever I thought I was just like a collection of moments of time, of experiences, of what have you, and that there was nothing solid about that. There was nothing real in the way that we think of ourselves as being real.
My mind was pulled away. I was shaking with cold. I wasn't prepared for how cold it will be. The stick was whacking everyone from behind whenever you would just move a little bit or nod your head or anything. There's just this pressure cooker intensity, yet I could not kind of gather my mind.
For me, it was a very visceral thing. Like, it was very much in the heart area.
And then past and future started to fall like dominoes. Like, it literally felt like there were these thundering things like falling down until there was this incredibly intense reverberating now feeling.
And I went outside. I couldn't go and sit for this round. I went outside and it was just like the tears were just streaming, and it was just it was like a profoundly humbling moment in my life.
The shifts that came were, I don't even know who's here as a result of that.
It was tremendous and terrifying and beautiful.
And I remember very clearly the stillness and coming out from the meditation hall and seeing the snow falling and
I think when I was really little, my life had this incredibly like sparkly feeling, maybe until 8 or 9 or 10 or something. I don't remember a lot of the details of anything from back then, but I remember being really happy a lot of the time, and things felt very exuberant, dynamic, exciting.
I was a rascal. I was really a big troublemaker as a kid, and also with the moral spine pretty off, I would say. Shoplifting or stuff like that was very kind of coming natural to me in a way. So,
and then from like 10 to mid 20s, especially 10 to 20, everything felt so heavy and dark and clunky.
Before I really had heard of a spiritual path or awakening or anything like that, I think I had a worldview that was essentially pretty similar to my parents. And my parents were both medical doctors who invested their lives in science and reason. And I think I carried a lot of that with me and kind of lived from that place, imagining that I could navigate the world, understand the world, essentially just with the mind.
Life for me it was caught up. I mean, I didn't know anything outside of all the things I was taught to do. Get up, go to work, be a good son.
There was also a sense of being a good person that was transmitted to me. So I think from my sense of what that was like for my parents was more of an obligation, of a duty, rather than something that came from a deep, heartfelt sense.
There was no context really to life. It was, my mom taught me to do this, so I'm gonna go do that. My dad expects me to be this way, so that's the way I'm gonna be. Go to work, get a car, become successful, whatever that looked like.
But there was a sense of like just being in this like mechanical, boring world. And if I looked at the adults around me, they seemed even more bored than I was. And they were just keeping themselves busy with stupid stuff to distract themselves from it.
My being in the world again, mostly from the head without a sense of the emotions behind my actions or why I was doing things. What was my motivation really wasn't something I thought about. I just was on autopilot.
I remember just really feeling like this. A lot of the cultural values at the time just felt so hollow. It was very difficult to how to orient myself in my 20s, because I felt like there wasn't anything I could see that was worth striving for.
My general experience of being, I guess the word that comes to mind is contracted. There was just something really contracted about it.
I think something that I was up against was a lot of a feeling of confusion. Like, I really didn't understand what life was about. I found myself even wondering how it was I got here. That was like one of the questions that I used to think about. But it felt like I was struggling to find out, what is this life about? And I wondered if other people somehow knew something about life that I didn't know.
Very just distinct sense of me being in a threatening world, trying to navigate that and doing my best to kind of gain for myself, and not caring much about how it affects the environment.
And if there was an emotion that was present for me, it was definitely of the afflictive variety of depression, of loneliness. But like any good citizen, I did my best to not go there.
I was suicidal for about 10 years. And as far as I know, there was no trauma that caused it, I have a good family, I had friends, I had good grades, all that stuff.
There was a profound sadness that I came in touch with, like a pain of the world. And at the time, I didn't know much of what that was. It felt like this intense suffering. And at the time, I thought it was the world's suffering was what I was touching into. But it was my own. And it was a profound thing. And that followed me throughout my entire adult life.
So in the end, I think my baseline was a place that was sort of dry. I had a sense of humor. I could have fun sometimes, but it was mostly like a life that sort of felt like it was chosen for me.
So it had this real feel of intolerability.
I had multiple jobs. I tried different companies. I ended up in tech doing software sort of by accident, and I just kept going down that path. There was definitely some moments where I didn't enjoy the work I was doing or the people I was working with, but the only recourse I really had was to find a different job.
Maybe other people looked at me and saw me as someone that was restless, and maybe they wouldn't put it like I was a seeker, in the way we think of a spiritual seeker, but it was like I was trying to figure something out. So I would read a lot of books, and I would kind of think a lot about life and my life situation and my family, and try to make sense of it.
As I grew older, as I started to go through middle school and high school, I became unsure of a place I would have in the world.
I think I was seeking permission from my thinking mind to proceed forward, knowing that there was something of value out there. I probably didn't realize at the time that I was actually looking for nothing.
So yeah, in my mid-20s, I started meditating, and a whole lot changed then.
One experience that I had when I was 19 years old that led me to feel like there was something more to life was doing LSD. And that was really interesting, because I had gone through my teens just rejecting spirituality, rejecting religion, really more kind of embracing science as what I was going to look to understand life. And I did LSD, and it was probably the singular most religious experience I'd had in my life by far. And that was really hard for me to integrate because I didn't have something within in which I could, map that experience onto.
In my early 30s, I felt like I had done all the stuff I was supposed to do. Like I had a good job, I was with a great guy, I had a wonderful daughter, and I was still unhappy. And the only part of my life that gave me this constant sort of like strumming joy was through my practice, which was also sort of a mess. Like it wasn't tied to a lineage. I didn't have someone telling me I was gonna guaranteed wake up in 5 years if I just kept following all the rules. So it felt like there was this one source of really deep joy, and the rest of my life was just sort of whatever it was.
Maybe very temporary states on drugs that did feel different, and were showing that there is actually plasticity to experience. It doesn't need to be kind of looking through the same sort of veil. Yet they were always coming and going, and there was no promise in it that there is actually a way out of it. There was just a temporary relief.
I got into drinking, actually. There was no relief from it. And every time I drank, I touched into that.
LSD gave me the feeling of not being in this clunky world of objects banging together and of just the chronic dissatisfaction that everyone seemed to be in. But it seemed silly to have to get that from a drug that had a come up and a come down that you had to keep taking.
But I definitely did become aware of what I would call like that internal hedonic treadmill. I was oriented towards something in the future, and then that future moment would come, and then there wasn't really like, they didn't deliver the satisfaction that had been promised. And then the mind would present the next thing. And it was seeing this relentless hedonic treadmill. Something about that was very discouraging.
As I got older, the ability to stop doing what I was doing was becoming less and less of a choice. It was just, I was just kind of getting swept away. And when I realized that I couldn't stop, that was like a pivotal point. What do I do then? What do I do then?
So if you, from that space, have a desire to like blow all your money on something stupid, buy a mansion and buy a sports car, if you're not distracting, that will correct itself pretty quickly. You'll realize like, oh, there's no joy in that either. I'm still suffering. And then if you want a partner, or you want 30 partners, or you want 100 partners or whatever, go do that too. Because if you can survive it and you don't distract yourself, like your nervous system life will let you know like you're still suffering. That didn't fix it. So at least what you do is you chuck out all the alternatives where you think joy is hiding.
I definitely had a history of attention deficit disorder, and the explanation that I heard in my own head was, oh, going to meditation, being with these people, this is so that I can learn how to focus and concentrate, ostensibly to continue to pursue those worldly things that I thought I was supposed to do. So that was definitely the early part of it. And yet it so quickly and clearly led to another mental thing that was, I think, one step closer to going beyond, which was philosophy, like understanding the world. Why are things the way they are? Why do I think the way I do?
When everything came to a point where there was nothing for me to do, there was, honestly, there was just chaos. Because at that point, I had no control. I didn't know what to do. Things kind of went off the rails for a while. Drinking got heavy, really, really heavy. So I reached out to someone who can help. And it was a facility, a treatment facility. And I didn't know what that would look like either, because that happened when I was like completely obliterated. Something stilled inside of me enough to say help. I don't know, help.
The path towards something greater, something bigger, something beyond what I had known came through heartbreak. I had somehow ended up dating a woman who I'd been in love with for years before we dated. And when that relationship ended, I found myself living alone in the town next to where everyone I knew lived, just far enough so that it was harder to hang out. I couldn't afford to have cable television, so I didn't really have TV to look at. And I just so happened to live a 5-minute walk from the library. So not having anything else to do, I wandered in there, and one day, staring back at me from the cover of a book was the Dalai Lama.
There was a lot of self-doubt. Underneath like the doubt and the confusion, felt like this really strong orientation to what I would call truth. Like I was oriented toward what I felt was truth, but I didn't know what that truth was. But it felt like something that I knew existed somehow.
But I remember going after a period of having some experiences with psychedelics, going for a talk by a Zen teacher that he came to the city I was living in. And I remember him sitting on a stage, and there was something just free and joyful, just natural, childlike also, but at the same time, kind of with the gravity, his presence had some power to it. So I remember seeing that and sensing, oh, this is a person. I don't think I met anybody else like that. And I kind of want to explore what's that.
It was my brother, actually, because he was in a pretty bad car wreck in his early 20s. I think it was like 20 or 21. And he came into some of the understanding of awakening. And when I look back at it, all the signs were there. He was telling me what to do, how to do it. It was almost subconsciously, but I wouldn't listen.
There was probably something subconscious that I wasn't aware of that was drawing me into the essence of the Dalai Lama. And he just is such a powerful figure of something beyond, but also something extremely kind.
Well, the first time I did LSD, like pretty young, I was like, oh, there it is. Like, there it is. There's a lot of other stuff like perceptual, like the walls were changing color and my thoughts were all like disarrayed, but the felt sense of it felt like, oh yeah, that thing.
I joined a book discussion group, and when I walked in, there was a few people there, and there was a woman in particular who, her name was Helen, and when I came into this room, she didn't say anything, but it was something about just coming into her presence just kind of stopped me in my tracks. I could feel something from her apart from the other people in the room. And it was like this profound stillness, profound silence. And it was the first time I'd ever encountered that, being with another person. And she became a very good friend of mine, and I came to learn that she had been part of a Tibetan Buddhist community for about 25 years.
I think I heard about awakening for the first time. Actually, I don't know when I heard about it the first time, but the first time it became like a conscious thought in my mind was again in my mid-20s when I decided that, psychedelics shouldn't be necessary for this. I went and read Zen and the Brain, which is this like big fucking book about all the neuroscience around Zen and what studying Zen practitioners. I don't know. It felt like meditation and awakening was somehow sort of in my field. I don't know when I heard about it or why it spiked my interest, but there was a sense of like, oh yeah, that thing, like as though that's the next natural thing. Like I'm supposed to go over there. But when I started practicing, I didn't really know it. Like my first few sets were definitely not like, oh, I'm coming home. I was like, wow, this is hard. Like, this is really hard. And my mind is a shit show. But there was sort of just a sense of, oh yeah, like we're going that way. Like that's where we're going next.
Everything I thought I knew about life and things that I thought I needed to do was put on hold because I didn't know what to really expect being there. But they cut all communications. So you weren't allowed to have cell phones, emails. You were solely there to kind of focus on you.
The style of this retreat, it was a 1-month-long retreat, but the first 3 days, there's this practice in Zen called Tangaryo, or sometimes New Azume. this is tradition that when the young postulate is coming to the monastery, they need to go through a process of kind of testing. Are they really looking for liberation, or are they just for a free food and stuff?
I had found myself with a greater access to something bigger than myself. I still don't think of that as an initial awakening, but it at least had the flavor of I am. If I remember correctly, I thought that might have been my awakening.
I started by going to talks with Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and I started to have glimpses just going to these talks, and that was really inspiring.
I went into that space. It was a recognition that I needed to be here, and while I was here, let's see what happens.
I made a friend who introduced me to a group that came out of women's work and the Mankind Project to create a co-ed experience of mixing of spirituality with psychology. So after about a year and a half, in part because of my relationship with this new friend, I found myself on a week-long retreat that incorporated things like yoga, meditation, but also the kind of processing work that anyone who knows about the Mankind Project or women's work will be familiar with.
So they make you sit without any movement for a few days, basically, and you can go for meals, you can go to toilet, but the schedule, as I remember, was 1.5 hours of sitting straight, then breakfast, then 3 hours of sitting straight, then lunch, then 4 hours of sitting straight, then dinner, and then 1.5 hours of sitting, and then going to sleep. So that was, I came in the afternoon, that was my first retreat ever, and then from the next day, 3 days of that started. And admittedly, it was painful physically, it was really challenging, yet through this situation of being completely without escape, there was just me and my mind, the sweat and the heat and this very moment, and there was no way I could escape it. There was nothing to distract myself from it.
It did have a psychological aspect. At that point, I think, is when I was really on to something beyond the conceptual mind.
And so that was my kind of crash course in practice and retreats. And after that, I really fell in love with this particular flavor of practice and kind of continued that.
That was probably like the biggest experience of that I'd had up until that point. And I remember my reaction when we came back to sit. I was just bawling, and I was just, the words were, "How could it be so beautiful?" It was just like this, how was it possible? It was like, it was upsetting in a way.
A potential downside to talking about awakening as an event is that it sets a person up to looking for something in the future, where it's the realization process is basically showing you that it's always here, it's always been here, but it's something that is just being overlooked.
We are kind of creating whole internal worlds, whole narratives, whole stories that kind of make us miserable, basically, at the end of the day.
It's like we're up against all of these unquestioned assumptions about what we are and what reality is. And just by bringing that attention, again and again, into the experience that is here now, and not rejecting it, not rejecting aspects of it, which can be really difficult when you're suffering, because it's like you're trying to get to something better than what's at hand. But by negating or rejecting what's here, you're looking away from you're looking away from what you really are.
There was this one teacher, Korean teacher, who used to say, try 10,000 years nonstop. And it doesn't mean to kind of create this timeline. It's rather like checkmating the ego that wants to have it this way, wants to have it fast, wants to have it that way. It's rather, if you have the heart that will embark on this journey, even if it would take 10,000 years, then tomorrow it will happen, right? It can happen right now. But if you have this mind that is still haggling and want it to be this way or want to have it that way, or kind of, imposes its own conditions on this process, then it'll be more of a struggle. But if you'll be like fully there and being like, okay, I'm here, whatever needs to happen, I'm here for that. And however whatever it takes, I will be here because I treasure this process of unfolding so much.
I did a week-long retreat that was explicitly about having awakening experiences. So at that time, I had really honed in on this path of awakening. And I also had powerful experiences at that retreat that, again, didn't lead to anything stable. But I think it did fuel a sense that there is something there's something worth pursuing.
What I started to find was there was something that was kind of weaving these senses together, that was like this ephemeral kind of thing, but it was a sense of me. But what was that really when I was looking at it? And there was a curious thing with this. It wasn't trying to change it or to make it be something different. It was just really a curiosity to see what it is really. What is that's really here? Like, what is it doing? What's it not doing? Where does it belong? Where's it trying to go?
When it comes to inquiry, for me, the most important part is that you really care about what you're asking, that you are emotionally, even physically involved in this inquiry, that it's important to you, and that it doesn't simply exist as a pondering, like, I wonder about this thing. I mean, it can start there, but the most important thing is the engagement with it.
And then spontaneously, I read about Ramana Maharshi, and I just started doing self-inquiry, and I did it pretty obsessively. So I would wake up and I would just try to look at the looker, or, who's driving this car. And I remember one time I was driving this car and I thought, it was one of the first times I did it, I really look like what's driving this car. And I got so panicked because there wasn't an answer. There was just this teeming void back there. And I sort of snapped back to the fact that I'm driving a car and the thing needs to stay on the road. And it was really startling and cool.
I didn't know me. I didn't know myself outside of the things I thought of myself, the expectations I placed on myself. I knew nothing of who I was. That was the first time that inquiry really dawned on in a natural way.
I started grad school for counseling psychology in a program that emphasized both meditation and self-inquiry. And as I was engaging on that process, it was absolutely not a linear step-by-step road to having an initial awakening, which happened in 2020. So instead, it kind of felt more like having opened Pandora's box, being flooded with all the different feelings that I would later label as traumatic experiences, responses to trauma, being all kinds of reactivity that I can still feel today as that process continues to unfold.
Who are you outside of all of this? Because you're here now and you have no clue who and what you are. So the insight that came from that was, so then why do you believe everything you're telling yourself? That's when things really started to open up.
That moment in that retreat, despite being so early on in my journey, was the point of no return. There was no going back after that.
It was coming in really humbly and approaching myself, my mind in that way.
In my case, it genuinely was a path of failure.
And one of my best friends, he invited me to come to India with him. And I was so on fire and so uncomfortable in my life and so like scrambling for something that felt right and important, but again, with no like clear, dissatisfying thing. I couldn't point to anything. I wasn't sick. I wasn't on the streets. I wasn't broke. I wasn't depressed. I was just like, I don't know what this is. I don't know why I'm not happy.
In 2001, I went to a 10-day Vipassana retreat. And I remember when I arrived at the retreat, I was an emotionally a little bit difficult place. I had lost my best friend a few months before, and I found that the retreat schedule was quite difficult, and I really struggled a lot with that, the timetable. So it's like 9-10 hours a day of formal seated meditation.
So he asked me to come to India, and I was so on fire that I was like, yeah, wherever, like we can go to Antarctica. I don't care. So there was just a sense of, I'll go to India, I'll go wherever, let's just go. And coincidentally, where he took me was Ramana's hometown, or like where Ramana's ashram is. So the whole town has this Ramana flavor, and people are doing self-inquiry.
Koans generally are, you can say, divided into categories. And the initial category is the breakthrough koan, which is designed to induce this initial shift in identity, this what we call awakening. And this, depending, there are a few different breakthrough koans, but probably the most often used ones are either mu, or what is this sound of one hand, or what was your original face before your parents were born. And with, let's say, with mu koan itself, it's simply unifying the entire body-mind in this one single point.
And I went to a lot of non-dual satsangs there. So many of them. It's like non-dual Christmas. Like there's, 5 a day. And they were useless to me. And I say this with as much respect as I can muster, because I think they're really useful for some people. But I just kept walking out of them because I was like, this is bullshit. Like meditation at least works. Like it does something. But this conversation around an awakening that dude supposedly has that I don't have, that gives me no method to actually get it. It's just it just felt like nonsense, like the worst kind of cocktail party ever. And so I was there for a while, and then after the first week, I stopped going.
And I had just a lot of thoughts, a lot of stuff coming up. But by the 8th day, what happened was I was sitting in meditation, I think it was in the morning, and it was like the thoughts completely subsided.
And of course, the most traditional description of it is you reach the point where it's like a hot iron ball in your throat. You neither can spit it out nor swallow it. And you unify the mind. And of course, there are different ways of entering it. But in Japan, very often they would actually make at first vocalize the mu on the exhale. So one would enter the mu through kind of practicing in silence, of course not out loud, although there are temples that sometimes people do it also out loud. But it's about the unifying the entire body-mind in this one single point and continuing it, as they say, the 10,000 miles long one iron bar. There's no any diversion from it. There's only mu. There's only this one single doing, as my teacher would say.
And I just sat in cafes and just meditated in the mornings and relaxed, and I was having a pretty good time. And I coincidentally met 2 guys who were from the US, and I asked them what they were there for, and they said, oh yeah, we're doing a retreat around the end of the spiritual path. Or no, they said, we just got out of a retreat, and they didn't say anything else. And I said, what was the retreat about? They're like, oh, it's for people who are at the end of ready to be done with the spiritual path. And now I'm like a little interested, and I'm like, oh, who teaches that? And they're like, this guy. And now I'm intrigued because everyone in that town is trying to sell you on their teacher. Everyone is like, my teacher, come see my teacher. He's got the best robes.
And through this unification, like all the extraneous thoughts start to subside, and then there's it reaches the point where it has its own momentum. It's kind of as if you try to drink something and then you just dove into the water and you're completely immersed in it. There's nothing outside of it. So that's the kind of process of unfolding of it.
And then there was a pain meditation that we were doing for one of the therapists in there. And that was the first time I think I just relaxed. I laid down, followed somebody else's instructions, and relaxed. Because my entire life up to that, I was in control. In that place, I had no control. So I thought, so it was, it started to break all these patterns. But that's when things really started to open up. When I paused is when the opening really started to happen.
And I'm like, well, so who is this guy? Like, could I see him? For some reason I'm interested, probably because they're not telling me much. They're like, he's not that easy to get to. He's kind of private. Now I'm like super interested. I'm like, is this guy levitate? Like, what is it? And so one guy gives me his book and is like, here, this is his book. I'm done with it. I don't need it anymore. Like, I got what I needed. And so I start looking at the book and I'm like, oh, okay, I'd like to meet this guy. And they're like, yeah, kind of hemming and hawing around it. And at that moment, the guy who wrote the book, their teacher, walks in the cafe.
It starts to feel when this one-pointed approach starts to kind of gaining its own momentum. It's basically, it's not like you're carrying your practice into different places. There is this all-encompassing one-pointed practice within which then, activities can unfold. Like, in a monastery, you have to wash the dishes, you have to go to the toilet. I mean, all the daily activities of life have to happen. But the sense is that it's all one movement of the same thing. And all the sounds start to be that, and all the sights start to be that, and all the activities that are being perceived start to be that. And there's nothing outside of it. There's just this one-pointed move that is brilliantly shining through all of this. Yeah.
And it's this guy, Salvadore Poe, and he's like, hey, what's up? It's totally casual, no robes, And they're like, oh, Barine was just saying she wanted to meet you. And Sal goes, oh, okay, hi, Barine. Like, what do you want? Or something like that, very directly. And I said something really dumb in retrospect. I think I said something like, I'd like a little more freedom. And it was a very sort of timid, not fitting my own self-image way of saying it. And he kind of looked at me and raised an eyebrow and was like, just a little bit. And laughed, and I laughed, and that was the end of it. But then he's like, all right, I see you're holding my book, look at the book and text me if you have questions. So I read the book that night and it opened something.
I kind of went in a way that I had never gone in before. And even as I think about it now, I feel a little bit teary because that moment has carried forward through today. And I imagine will continue to carry forward. And what it was just this sort of experience of a fundamental fact that I couldn't avoid. And it was just something that I cared. I cared, and there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't choose to care. You could call it love. I realized that I felt love in this way that was beyond, it was actually beyond concept.
If we want to think about reality, if we want to kind of look at the most elemental aspects of it, I feel like it is love. But it's not a love the way people think of love, like love for another person. It is maybe a very, very deep acceptance.
First opening for me was when I was in the Rohatsu session, which is the retreat commemorating Buddha's enlightenment. And it's the most strict, the most intense retreat in the whole year.
I had started a business that got crushed by the pandemic. I found myself in Seattle, and I decided that I would take advantage of this free time that I had before I had to find another job or start a business, to do a 3-week solitary retreat by myself. And then during that period of time, I also joined a 5-day online retreat. And it so happened that on the second day of that retreat was when I had what was an initial awakening into no self.
Your mind is chattering at 100 miles an hour, just going away, going away, going away, going away. And then there's just this. Right here, right now. Nothing to be said.
There's this sense of like, okay, this finally is it. And I remember the days were passing and I was trying to unify the mind, but for whatever reason, at those times, it was just the distractions were coming up. My mind was pulled away. I was shaking with cold. I wasn't prepared for how cold it'll be. The stick was whacking everyone from behind whenever you would just move a little bit or nod your head or anything. There's just this pressure cooker intensity, yet I could not kind of gather my mind. I could not make this kind of singular movement.
And he had a bunch of us like on his rooftop just drinking tea and talking. And I sat with him the first day. I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought he was saying things very different than what other people were saying in all the satsangs I had been to in the prior week. And then the second day, he asked me to look. And he said, "Is there a past, Barine?" And I said, "Well, I know technically there's no past, but it sure feels like." He's like, "Oh, shut up. I didn't ask you. Does it feel like there's a past?" I said, "Go look. Is there a past?" And for some reason, I looked, and in that moment, I could see that the past was a thought, but like very viscerally, like I had spent so much time meditating, seeing thoughts, but this was different. And then I could see past and future were just thoughts, had always only been thoughts. My entire Barine story, character, life, loves, cares, hatreds, everything were just thoughts.
What I was looking for was always here. The razor's edge that I touched into, it's all of this, right here. Then I laughed my ass off. Because you're like, shit. I was doing the self-inquiry stuff. I was doing some other stuff. I was like, wait a minute. It's you. You're here. Where else are you gonna be? What else are you gonna find? It's you, both sides of it, here. Then inquiry was effective because it plucked me out of all the ideas and concepts. So there was this essence that was here, but what was that? No more ideas, no more concepts, no finding it outside.
And what happened was, it was so new to me just to sit with no thought that I could feel myself almost like reaching out, trying to grab onto something to stabilize myself. And I could feel like this reaction of fear rising up, but somehow I was able to calm myself down. And then it was like the stillness persisted.
On the second day of this 5-day retreat, in the morning, there was a guided meditation, and I had been feeling a lot of emotions coming through during this time. I'd already been sitting for a week, and I was in the groove of being open and welcoming of all kinds of different emotions, a lot of difficult feelings. And there were some pointing instructions during this meditation that were talking about individual points of sensations. As I was tuning into that, there was this moment, and I don't even know to this day that it really makes sense, but that, even this process of me noticing these things was also like these things. It was just a series of moments, a series of points of contact, of consciousness. And somehow in that moment, I just was like, oh my God, what just happened? And that was my moment. That was when there was this realization that whoever I thought I was just like a collection of moments of time, of experiences, of what have you, and that there was nothing solid about that. There was nothing real in the way that we think of ourselves as being real. So after that moment, I just kind of started laughing, and I kind of didn't even pay attention to the rest of the guided meditation. I just kind of sat there in wonderment for a while. And then I think pretty soon after that, it was a break, and I went on a walk and just was wandering through this park thinking like, holy shit, like, look at those trees. Like, oh my God. And just like everything was so intense and immediate. And that word immediate just came to mind right away. It was like, oh, there's nothing between me and what's happening right now. This is just this pure experience.
For me, it was a very visceral thing. Like, it was very much in the heart area, and it was very emotional, and just like a cascade of insights about myself. And there were tears, and I went outside. I couldn't go and sit for this round. I went outside, and it was just like the tears were just streaming, and it was like a profoundly humbling moment in my life.
And I was sitting there while everybody was eating dinner. And at some point, I just felt like I couldn't resist anymore. And I was resisting the distraction. And at some point, I just turned around and I said, you know what? I welcome you. I welcome whatever is here. And in this moment, there started this movement happening. I started to feel all those things kind of coming up and out in some way. And initially, it felt like it was my thoughts. And then later, it started to feel like it was different experiences. And it could be a grief of a mother who lost her child. It could be joy of a young boy who achieved his dream or something. But there was just a lot of things were moving and moving and moving and moving. And then suddenly there's this utter silence after 10 or 15 minutes of that. And I remember very clearly this stillness, and coming out from the meditation hall and seeing the snow falling. And so there was this kind of initial shift that have occurred.
And I had another wave of fear come up again. And it was 2 times this happened. And then it was shortly after that, everybody took a break. So people left the hall and they went for a 10-minute walk. And then it was when I came back into the hall, I was standing at the back, just waiting for everybody else to come in and sit on their cushion. And that's the moment that it happened.
And then past and future started to fall like dominoes. It literally felt like there were these thundering things falling down until there was this incredibly intense reverberating now feeling. Which is nothing like the present moment they tell you about and all the spiritual stuff. It was tremendous and terrifying and beautiful. And then it felt like I had no head, weirdly. I don't know why. We weren't doing anything with heads or, energetic or physiological stuff. But for 3 weeks that I was in India after that, it just felt like what had been a head up here was just like an open window. And there was just breeze floating in and out. And there was nothing to say. When I saw my friend who had taken me to India, or these people that were hanging out with Sal, it was just didn't say much because there's nothing to say. And I was really happy. And suffering probably went down 98% or 99%. And stayed down when I left India too, for another year or a year and a half or so.
I would say that first shift was, initially, it was a place I was trying to get to. The shift was the realization that this is where you've always been. If you get pulled away, this is where you snap back to. This is your default setting. There are cycles to that, and it clears out until it settles. And then here you can really, really investigate and see what the nature of your experience is.
So after that morning, that sense of freshness and aliveness and purity in a way of experience continued for quite a while. I definitely experienced what is often called a honeymoon after an initial awakening. So my senses kind of remained very high during that time. There was also a much, much stronger sense of just the energy of joy, really a causeless joy. And as I did sort of re-enter the world, I did not jump into any kind of work right away, but I definitely noticed that my attitude towards relationships and towards life was very, very positive. I was feeling very good. I felt healthy and sharp, and that went on for several months for sure.
It's incomparable, but recognizable, because it was always here, and what covered it was all of that. It was instrumental to go through all of that, to be able to see this. It was a requisite to do the work. The shifts that came were, I don't even know who's here as a result of that, but I can try to describe what the shifts were. The initial shift was the realization that I didn't need to go anywhere to find it. The reality of that was I needed to get up to go and look, to realize that I didn't need to go and look.
When I came home from the retreat, boy, this was really like everything was different, and so much of the reactivity had just fallen away, and there was this like vast inner silence. Everything just felt like a beautiful flow, and I felt so happy, and I just wanted to share this happiness with everybody. I had so much energy. There was like a big energetic component to this first shift for me, that there was just so much energy in the body.
There's no suffering, and there was very, very little suffering. I'm sure if I had to get like a tooth pulled or something, it would have still been suffering. But there was a lot of joy and a lot of vibrancy. Like the sense doors were really alive. I never really knew what I was doing. I started to have to set like 8, 9, 10 alarms on my phone to remember to pick up my daughter and go to the grocery store and do my work. And there was literally like at least 10 alarms on my phone most days to just function. But I was really, really joyful.
Maybe another day for it to really sink in that something had shifted. And when I went home, it was like, it was so different how it felt to be me, how the world appeared. And it was absolutely beautiful, that period of my life. My advice to somebody who feels like there's too many thoughts, that they're getting in the way, my advice, having been there, would be to really not emphasize that they're not the problem that you are making them out to be.
You're establishing the relationship with thoughts, which is simply neutral, is the kind of first step. Thoughts are not your enemy. Thoughts are not statements of truth. Thoughts are nothing else. It's simply appearances that, like a bird chirping on the tree.
In a way, like the thoughts they're just like a substanceless phenomena. And it's when you're reacting to them, you're resisting them, that they become a problem. But they're not really a barrier.
You simply engage your mind in this sort of process of unifying into kind of more one-pointed, collected state. And in this way, you kind of get disidentified with the narrative. But also, at the same time, there are people who would kind of benefit from the sort of coming into close examination and contact with what the thought is made of, and kind of seeing its substance as, just empty energy.
If someone were to ask me for help, in dealing with what seems like too many thoughts, what seems like aversive thoughts or distracting thoughts. What I tend to say is, first of all, like, well, what are you talking about? What are these thoughts? And by naming them, we can start to have them be a little bit closer and not something that seems out of control or problematic. And that over time, what's really helped me, what I think helps a lot of people, is to make friends with our thoughts, welcome them in, ask them what they need, what's going on. Some people turn this into parts work. It doesn't really have to be that way. And just a fundamental friendliness towards really all of your experience, but especially with thoughts, can often, paradoxically, as we seem to give them more attention, they can often fade away on their own.
My advice to anyone with these emotions that can run wild is to sit, take a deep breath, and see what comes up with them. Don't try to hold them back. That's what I was doing my whole life. I wasn't even trying to hold them back. I was burying them, closing the door, locking it, tie a chain around it, and throwing the keys away. The process for me was to go and find that key, come back, undo that chain, unlock the door, and I'm sorry. I'm here to listen now.
I feel resistance to my emotions. I'm just saying completely yes to this no that I have. So I don't try to like pile up, judgment on top of resistance and everything. I'm like, okay, I'm totally accepting the fact that I'm resisting something right now. And then through that, slowly we can gain the access of just sitting and allowing, like throwing a stone into the pool of water that just naturally it's going down, even if it might be slow at first. And then we can come in contact with the deeper underlying emotion, and then let ourselves fully feel it, fully embrace it, fully accept it. And then kind of maybe some other layer would come up.
The way I encountered my emotions was to really sit for the first time and listen to what was coming up, because they had something to say, and my entire life I wasn't listening.
Asking what doesn't want to be felt, and kind of trying to sink into whatever is arising. And those most likely will be layers, right? There would be maybe fear at the kind of, or resistance, basic resistance, and then we naturally allow ourselves to kind of go into the resistance and just feel how it feels, and then we can go to the layer that might be fear or might be shame or kind of deeper emotions there. But the key is the sort of willingness, even if we feel stuck with them, to kind of completely allow ourselves to enter whatever we're feeling.
I was the one holding the doors closed on them, and all they were trying to do is teach what they had to teach and move on.
Every single thing, whether it's sadness or whether it's anger or whatever it is simply, as beautiful as rain can be, right? Like, or any weather pattern. And yet we just add layers upon layers upon layers at the top of it, and kind of go into more and more abstraction and forget that actually the very anger or sadness is nirvana itself, is just completely free appearances, a manifestation of Buddha nature that doesn't need anything to be done with it. It's just expressing itself as itself fully.
Trust your experience. Trust your experience. If you just put your attention on your experience, not on your thoughts about your experience, but just on your experience, and really just get really interested in everything. Everything is in the experience. Just try to cultivate more and more willingness to pay attention to what's here. That's going to help you. That's going to take you far.
For someone who is in suffering and is in doubt and it's not sure how to proceed, I think the first thing to know is there's a certainly there's a way to end this suffering. And now, what approach this person would take, I would be hesitant to speak to an abstract person. If this person, it takes sometimes some discernment what this person's natural tendency is, or what seemed to be more kind of beneficial approach for this person. But if it would be just, someone out there in the world that I don't have chance to kind of see, I would say try different things and see what really resonates, what kind of feels like it kind of captures your mind and heart and body.
I think what I'd say to someone who's really suffering, and not just the mild sort of suffering, but the almost intolerable levels of suffering that humans get to pretty often, I think I would say don't distract. Rule number one. Figure out what you're using to tolerate the suffering and don't do that anymore. So if it's drugs, try not to use that. And I'm not talking about antidepressants and stuff, but if it's a lot of TV, if it's shitty relationships, if it's whatever you're using to numb yourself away from the suffering, don't do that, because there's something very useful in the suffering. And it's going to burn a bit until you find out what the useful thing is.
I think working with a good guide can be really helpful, especially if you've been trying on your own and feeling like you're just spinning your wheels. Working with a guide can really make a big difference. It really was very helpful for me after working for many years on my own, because a lot of what we're up against is stuff that it's like, in a way, we're hiding. It's like we're hiding from things in the experience, and it can be difficult to see that on your own. But a good guide can help to get you to kind of look into the places that maybe you wouldn't be able to find on your own.
That you feel like actually intuitively you could follow this path, and just give it a go. Don't change immediately after first discouragement. Just give it some time, completely knowing that this is a process that sometimes makes us stumble, makes us fall, and with kind of patience, perseverance, and compassion, give yourself to this one approach. And yet, if you find in your experience that it's proven not to work, you can assess your strategy after a certain amount of time, a couple of months, and try something else and see how that goes. Yeah.
One thing I would say about this whole process is that the way this awakening process unfolds for everybody, there's something very beautiful and very unique for every person. And that if you can appreciate that, the uniqueness, to kind of cultivate like a trust, and even maybe even like if you can connect to a sense of devotion to the process itself.
But if you distract yourself, the suffering will still be there. You'll still be getting burned. You just might not notice as much. And then that's a whole other shit show to correct. Whenever I've used distraction, it's way more work to untangle on the other side. So just actually burn, actually suffer, and then try to find what you want while you're suffering. So not what you want to get away from the suffering. Those are going to be the distractions. But figure out what your actual desires are while you let yourself feel the full burn of the suffering.
We shouldn't try to copy how this process is happening in us. We shouldn't try to like match somebody else's process. If we do that, I think things can go awry. Enjoy how this process is unfolding for you. There's like why the rush? Okay, maybe what you're doing, you're rejecting what's here, imagining something is going to be better. Like, right? If you just put your attention on like enjoying where this process is for you right now, just go deep into that.